though airplanes shooting towards the sky had used many paragraphs and author's notes to explain that, quote, digging holes wasn't just about digging holes. Using this simple exercise, they could assess the digger's stamina, speed, perseverance, spiritual energy, circulation, and even moral character, etc. But Shen Qingqiu couldn't remember a single justification. In his heart, no matter how many explanations airplane bullshitted, it didn't change that the whole thing was just digging holes. The Shenzhou of this time had already ascended to the position of Qingjing Peak Lord. A rule of Changqiu Mountain was thus: the 12 peak lords moved as one, meaning that all their successions and departures were conducted in unison. The inauguration ceremonies were likewise always performed for a group, and the decision to retire was even more so united. Even if a peak lord met an unfortunate death during their tenure, their position remained empty. Back when Shen Qingqiu had faked his death and vanished for 5 years, Qingjing Peak's seat had remained vacant as well. So, peak lords of different generations never led together. This made certain extraordinary situations more troublesome, but without a generation gap, the emotional bonds and sense of camaraderie between the peak lords were much stronger. With this thought, Shen Qingqiu couldn't help but mentally jump to another rule. After confirming their succeeding disciples, the senior generation of peak lords always gave their heirs new names based on their generational character to highlight their special status. There were so many possible names that began with this generation's character, Qing, but Shenzhou just had to end up with Qingqiu, like the world was truly out to get him. Shenzhou hated the character Qiu to the bone, yet the name was bestowed upon him anyway. How couldn't he choke on the bitterness, even when Shen Qingqiu couldn't stop himself from wanting to coddle the man for 30 seconds? No wonder the original flavor felt little gratitude or respect toward the previous Qingjing Peak Lord. Shenzhou and Yue Qingyuan appeared to be engaged in discussion upon the rock. Shen Qingqiu glanced at little Luo Binghe, who was engrossed in his task. He gave his head a couple of phantom pats, then leapt onto the rock face to stand next to the duo, listening in. "There's even more people here this year, compared to past trials," said Yue Qingyuan. Shenzhou squinted, his expression devoid of joy or anger. With a subtle shift of his 2 fingers, the fan in his hand slightly opened. From the side, another person approached and bowed to Yue Qingyuan. "Sect leader Yue." This person completely ignored Shenzhou, who stood next to him, his eyes about to overflow with resentment. Besides Great Master Liu, who else would have that much arrogance? At this point, Liu Qingge's formal ascension to Baizhan Peak Lord II had likely only happened a couple of years ago. There was a visible air of immaturity about his features, his gaze fierce and sharp, and within his every action was a young man's spirited vigor. "Excellent timing, Liu Marshal Brother," said Yue Qingyuan. "Why not take a look and see who's best?" Liu Qingge only needed a glance to say, "Talent-wise, him." Shen Qingqiu gave a satisfied nod. Great Master Liu had a good eye indeed. The one he pointed to had his back to him, and it was the diligently digging Luo Binghe. "Does Liu Marshal Brother want him?" asked Yue Qingyuan. "Those who wish to come to me will come themselves." Baizhan Peak had always been the same. Come or don't come, do as you please. But if you come, prepare yourself for a beating. Anyone who waited around for others to take them as their disciple had no future and no place on Baizhan Peak. The ones who did were those who took the initiative to come to Baizhan Peak themselves, screaming and crying and begging to be beat up. Shenzhou said mildly, "Good talent doesn't guarantee success." Liu Qingge didn't even grace him with a sideways glance. but certainly more success than a nobody who only began proper cultivation at age 16. Sure enough, these two had never been able to see eye to eye. At all. Liu Qingge disliked speaking, and he disliked speaking to people with whom he didn't see eye to eye even more. Yet, for the purpose of taunting Shenjiu, he had actually managed 15 words. Wow! That his own current relationship with Liu Qingge wasn't too terrible was practically a miracle. Liu Master brother. Yue Qingyuan's tone was full of reproach. Liu Qingge had no interest in being lectured and turned to leave right away. I'm gonna practice. He departed without a second word, coming and going like the wind. Shenjiu stood stiffly in place, shaking in rage at Liu Qingge's insult. 2 sharp cracks sounded from the fan as he squeezed it, his grip overly powerful. Liu Master brother isn't good with words. Yue Qingyuan's tone was resigned. You've always known this, so you must not mind him. Shenjiu humphed, his air sullen and spiteful. He seemed about to say something when Ning Yingying clambered up.
师尊，师尊,
she called, flinging her arms around Shenjiu's waist.
Will Yingying get a younger brother or sister?
When Shenjiu looked at her, his face relaxed somewhat. Would you like a martial brother or sister? Ning Yingying nodded several times. Shenjiu raised his head and opened his fan, giving it a couple of waves. He squinted to himself, starting to plot something or other. Suddenly he spoke. I want that child. He was staring at Luo Binghe. Yue Qingyuan startled. The original flavor's unsavory track record in terms of his treatment of highly talented disciples had probably long since spread throughout the entire sect. Now he'd again asked his sect leader for a promising young sprout. Shen Qingqiu could understand Yue Qingyuan's hesitation. It really required some careful deliberation. Upon seeing Yue Qingyuan's reluctance and lack of answer, Shenjiu coldly repeated himself, I want him. Oh my God, speaking to even your sect leader that way, that's asking to be hit. Shen Qingqiu couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Unexpectedly, Yue Qingyuan slowly nodded, giving his consent. All right. Shen Qingqiu was utterly speechless. To think Yue Qingyuan could tolerate even that, exactly how had this body of his safely survived to this day? And then there was Great Master Liu. Oh, so the reason behind the original flavor wanting to snatch up Luo Binghe for himself at all costs was a seed of disaster you planted. Ning Yingying cheered and ran down the rock, heading into the crowd, into the canyon to grab Luo Binghe. In the original text, this was the opening scene of where Luo Binghe entered the sect under Shen Qingqiu. However, because it had been from the male lead's point of view, quote, Great Master aeroplane shooting towards the sky hadn't written the interactions between the 3 peak lords in detail, with all their subtle undercurrents. Instead, the passage had started right from a sweet-smelling young girl descending from the sky, suddenly coming to take Luo Binghe with her. Surely, upon reading that opening, every single reader had the same thought as Shen Yuan back then, that this would be the start of the male lead's godly and unstoppable good fortune, both in love and in general. They hardly imagined that it was actually a crumb of sugar before a grand parade of 300 stabs. Shen Qingqiu knew what awaited Luo Binghe next, but he could only continue watching helplessly. Watch as Luo Binghe followed Ning Yingying until they arrived at Qingjing Peak's bamboo house. Watch as Shenjiu sat in the seat where Shen Qingqiu always had, a teacup in hand, scraping at the tea leaves. Shenjiu quickly sent the chittering Ning Yingying away with an excuse. Ning Fan stood beside him and spoke in his place. "Starting from today, you will stay at Qingjing Peak." Little Luo Binghe's face was flushed red with surprised joy. He knelt to bow, form prim and proper, then said in a crisp, bright voice,
"Disciple Luo Binghe greets Shi Zun."
The corner of Shenjiu's mouth twitched, and he finally lowered the teacup from his chin. His words slow and measured. He said, "So, tell me, why did you come to Changqiu Mountain sect?" Luo Binghe nervously yet earnestly replied like he was reciting from a book.
"This disciple has always admired the many immortal masters on the mountain, their persons and demeanors both. If he can enter the sect and find success in his learning, this disciple's mother in heaven will be able to find peace."
Shen Qingqiu knew this was an answer that Luo Binghe had devised on the road, one that he tossed and turned and polished unceasingly. Shenjiu made a non-committal noise. "You had a mother?" Demeanor cavalier, he asked. "What was your mother like?" Luo Binghe raised his smiling face, his eyes shining brightly.
"Mother was the kindest person in all the world to me."
Shenjiu's face twitched, and he raised a hand to stop him. He looked Luo Binghe up and down once. "Indeed, you're at the best age for cultivating." Shen Qingqiu saw 3 things on the original Flavor's face: envy, envy, and more envy. Envy that Luo Binghe had a mother who was, quote, the kindest in all the world to him. Envy of Luo Binghe's talent. Envy that Luo Binghe would enter Changqiu Mountain sect at the best age for cultivating. He was indeed the kind of person to brim with envy and resentment toward a young child. Shenjiu stood and walked over to Luo Binghe. His steps measured. Shen Qingqiu inadvertently moved to shield him, but how could he stop anything? Luo Binghe raised his face and watched the Qingjing Peak Lord approach, his expression like that of a boy gazing at a celestial god. But who knew that the celestial god would walk right by him without a glance? At the same time, Shenjiu casually tossed the tea in his hand, cup and lid and all, onto Luo Binghe. The tea wasn't freshly boiled, the temperature only hot instead of scalding, but Luo Binghe's entire person still froze, stunned. Mingfan's footsteps padded after Shenjiu, who'd walked out of the bamboo house without a second word, hands behind his back. But before the former stepped out the door, he yelled behind him, "Kneel! Shi Zun hasn't allowed you to get up. If you dare to get up, be warned that you'll be strung up and beaten, and after the beating you'll be shut in the woodshed for 3 days." For the first time, Shen Qingqiu realized that, in terms of talent in digging his own canna-fodder grave, that child Mingfan really deserved full marks. Having just entered his apprenticeship, Luo Binghe had been full of joy and gratitude, but now that he had been splashed with a head full of tea for no reason, his heart had been wholly chilled and quenched, as if he'd taken a bucket of ice-cold water to the face, complete with ice cubes. He blankly remained kneeling in place, eyes unblinking. During the silence, 2 teardrops rolled down his cheeks. This was Luo Binghe's first cry since he personally buried his mother. It would also be the last time he cried at Changqiu Mountain sect. After this, no matter what humiliation he suffered, no matter what, quote, Shen Qingqiu did to him while venting his twisted feelings, Luo Binghe's tears never fell unrestrained in the way they did today. Shen Qingqiu crouched before him, but when he raised his sleeves, they passed right through Luo Binghe. He was unable to touch him, unable to hug him. He was completely helpless to even wipe away his tears. His heart ached and throbbed to the point he wished for death.
Don't cry,
Luo Binghe stared down at his knees, and the fists resting on his legs slowly clenched. His tears dripped faster, the drops splashing onto his lapels. Shizun will never hit you again. Shen Qingqiu fruitlessly wiped at his cheeks and coaxed him. So don't cry. Luo Binghe raised a hand and rubbed at his eyes, then carefully picked up the teacup on the ground before placing it to the side. Clutching that jade pendant to his chest, he corrected his kneeling posture. Shen Qingqiu knew what Luo Binghe was thinking at this moment. Surely he hadn't understood the rules and had done something wrong, angering the Peak Lord. That was why he'd been given this punishment. As a disciple, kneeling for his Shizun was also something he should do. Looking at those subtle movements of his, Shen Qingqiu couldn't help but kneel as well so that they were face to face. He reached out, tightly enveloping the entirety of Luo Binghe's small body in a phantom embrace. His eyes slid shut, and the world descended into darkness. When he next opened them, what filled his vision instead was a white bed curtain, its corners decorated with tassels. At the sudden change in scenery, Shen Qingqiu froze in place, surprised and unable to react, at least not before he heard Yue Qingyuan's voice behind him. Awake? Shen Qingqiu mechanically blinked a couple of times. His throat felt a bit dry, but he forced out his voice. Sect leader. Yue Qingyuan was sitting next to his bed. He watched Shen Qingqiu for a while, then said, You kept calling Luo Binghe's name. Oh. While crying. Shen Qingqiu wiped at his face. Other than sweat, he did in fact feel another type of liquid. Tears were truly infectious. After a pause, he guiltily said, Martial brother, let me explain. Explain what? What kind of convincing reason could he give for the reality that was, quote, the Qingjing Peak Lord was crying while calling out his disciple's name in a dream? At the sight of Shen Qingqiu unwilling to speak, Yue Qingyuan sighed. It's fine. It's enough that you are awake. No need to explain. Shen Qingqiu awkwardly sat up. Suddenly, he thought this scene was a little familiar. The first time he'd woken in this world, Yue Qingyuan had also been at this bedside, watching over him. Yue Qingyuan studied his complexion. You slept for 5 days. Do you wish to continue sleeping? 5 days! Shen Qingqiu almost fell over right there. System. Plot hole filling completion rate for target, quote, 神9, 70%. Only 70% complete? Wait, other than the 10% lost due to incomplete memory incident, where was the remaining 20? Where had it gone? There was no time to give it more thought. Shen Qingqiu first grabbed Yue Qingyuan. Sect leader, the first day of snow, the Luo River. Realizing that he was too agitated and his words were incoherent, Shen Qingqiu composed himself, transforming his expression into something calm and stern. I mean, that it's highly probable that Tianlangjun will choose that time and location to use Xingmo sword to create a portal when he begins to merge the two realms. How do you know? Asked Yue Qingyuan. Shen Qingqiu was stuck again. How could he say that it was because it had been written in the original text that these would be the most suitable time and location? I was in Tianlangjun's hands for a while, he replied. And he told you just like that? Shen Qingqiu couldn't come up with an explanation on the spot, so he could only forge ahead. Please, sect leader, you have to believe me. Yue Qingyuan gazed at him for a while, then closed his eyes for another long moment. Afterward, he stood up and gently said, "Rest first. Leave this issue to your fellow sect members."
Rest? Did he mean sleep? Shen Qingqiu had already slept for 5 days. Only proud immortal demon Wei would shrug at the idea of a cultivator at core formation stage sleeping so much. I dare you to try writing this in another Zhongdian literature novel. The author would be mocked until his mother couldn't recognize him.
Once Yue Qingyuan's footsteps faded, Shen Qingqiu tumbled off the bed, searching everywhere for his outer robe. As he spun around haphazardly, he failed to notice someone approaching him from behind. A hand covered his eyes. Shen Qingqiu automatically struck out with his elbow.
Who is it?
Who else would have the guts to play such a stupid trick, let alone the interest? His hand was firmly caught in a grasp, and a familiar voice spoke by his ear. Why doesn't Shi Cun guess? What was the point of guessing when he'd already opened his mouth and called him Shi Cun? Shen Qingqiu was rolling his eyes when the person behind him suddenly grabbed his waist, causing them both to tumble onto the bamboo couch to the side. Its bamboo twigs crackled under their combined weight. The object blocking his eyes moved away. Sure enough, it was Luo Binghe. That hand moved to cover Shen Qingqiu's mouth instead. Don't blink. Shi Cun's eyelashes are so long, they tickled me too much, and now both my hand and my heart are itchy.
You're the one with the long eyelashes! The person with the longest eyelashes is you!
Shen Qingqiu continuously blinked dozens of times, expressing his anger. Luo Binghe smiled, then kissed his eyelids softly. Shh, don't shout. If someone from Qingqing Peak discovers us, Shi Cun's prestigious reputation would truly be ruined. What reputation? It long since been ruined by this infilial disciple. Luo Binghe kissed his way down Shen Qingqiu's eyes. I said that I would come for you. It's been so many days since our last meeting. Did Shi Cun miss me? According to the standard response, Shen Qingqiu had in mind, first he should knee Luo Binghe in the belly, then kick this infilial disciple away and tidy up his appearance before finally delivering a cold and aloof, I didn't. But somehow, when he thought back to the recent memory of Luo Binghe kneeling alone in the bamboo house, silently picking up the teacup off the floor, his leg couldn't obey him at all. Shen Qingqiu's breathing also seemed to tremble against Luo Binghe's palm. He closed his eyes and nodded.